Hey, everyone.
I'm gonna wait. I have a big
Oh,
introduction.
a whole
I'm
deal.
not gonna just
Okay,
say this is Sam.
very good.
Okay. So Sam Daley-Harris founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results in 1980 and co-founded the Microcredit Summit campaign in 1995 with Nobel
Hold on,
Peace
I'm trying to
Prize
get my.
laureate Mohammed Yunus and FINCA founder John Hatch. Civic Courage helps nonprofits transform their members into courageous citizens, leaders, and users, uses public speaking and the media to inspire Americans to engage powerfully with their democracy. Daley-Harris coached Citizens Climate Lobby its first 7 years and is author of Reclaiming Our Democracy, Healing the Break Between People and Government, about which President Jimmy Carter said Daley-Harris provided a roadmap for global involvement in planning a better future. Ashkola founder Bill Drayton called Daley-Harris one of the certified great social entrepreneurs of the last decade. So with that, I am going to hand this over to Sam. I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves until the Q&A. Sam, it's all yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ellen, for inviting me. Thank you to the Jewish Center of Princeton. And thank you for friends new tonight and old for joining us. I want to say a few things. I have a bunch of slides, but we won't start for a while. The title of the talk is Frustrated with Tikkun Olam Light. We'll show you how much more is possible. But I do want to start with, there are no kindnesses or acts of healing the world that are too small. This session is not meant to diminish any actions, no matter what the size. Instead, the session is for those of us who yearn to make a larger contribution to life and to the world. And in my typical talks, I start with a thing called the story of self, which I'll do in a moment and I'll describe what it is. But I'm going to start before that with my Jewish story and my Jewish journey. And it's not like I'm recommending it for anyone. It's just the way it was. And so here it is. And I took a little while to write this down. Of course, I did 25 talks like this in 2019, but not like this for the Jewish Center and the like. So this is a bit different. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and I saw falling snow for the first time when I was 25 years old. My childhood was mostly in the 1950s, and I was bar mitzvahed in 1959. Up until age 15, I went to Shabbat services every Saturday morning with my father, my brother, my grandma Becky, who was the daughter of Rabbi David Schlossberg, my uncle, and my 2 cousins. It was then the West Miami Jewish Center, later renamed Temple Zion. We kept kosher, which meant we seldom went out to eat. Girls were bat mitzvahed Friday night, if they were bat mitzvahed at all. I don't have any memories of the phrase Tikkun Olam. There were no chesed projects for B'nai Mitzvot, and I have a vague memory of a Karen Ami box, but it was only a vague memory. At the end of the summer of 10th grade, I went to USY camp for 4 days at Camp Blue Star in the Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. I was a kid from Miami, elevation 6 feet. And on the last day of camp, a group of us climbed to the top of the mountain and took in the view of the Blue Ridge Mountains as far as the eye could see. It was transcendent. In the last 25 years of my father's life, he went to shul twice a day and was in charge of getting the minyan, which became increasingly difficult as West Miami, the town I grew up in, became overwhelmingly Hispanic. For a number of years, my primary instrument in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra was the cymbals. When we would go to shul together and this part of the 150th Psalm was sung, my father would sing a little louder, maybe a little prouder. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Batzil Tzilei Shema. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Batzil Tzilei Trua. Praise God with clashing cymbals. Praise God with resounding cymbals. My father said mourner's Kaddish twice a day for decades, saying Kaddish for anyone who didn't have someone to say Kaddish for them. As I became a musician, a high school music teacher, and an activist, there was a 50-year period when I was a high holidays Passover Jew, living in Los Angeles, then Washington, D.C., and now Princeton. That shifted in recent years, saying Kaddish for my mom. This next story is one I just about never tell. It's the mid to late 1970s. The four Grossberg sisters had returned to Miami to be with their father, Cantor Ben Grossberg, who was in the hospital. Two of the sisters had been high school students of mine. I would join them in their home or at their hospital visits to see their father, but I wasn't going this particular evening. I was at home with my roommate, and we heard cries from the house next door. We rushed over to find our neighbor on the floor next to the bed, his wife sobbing. We did what we could, and when the emergency units arrived, they pronounced him dead on the scene. We returned home shaken. I got a call from one of the sisters saying she knew I wasn't coming up this evening, but their father had taken a turn for the worst, and could I come tonight anyway? I said, yes, of course, I'll come after rush hour. My roommate and I talked about the death next door, the impending death in North Miami, and about life. At the time, I owned 76 hours of Ram Dass tapes, which I loved listening to. I discussed Ram Dass's guru's three teachings: love everyone, serve everyone, remember God. My friend's father made it through the night and recovered. That weekend, I went to a friend's son's bar mitzvah. The Haftorah included Micah 6:8. The Eternal has told you what is God, what is good, and what God requires of you, only to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. I was stunned, exhilarated, but stunned. I was not familiar with this passage. How was that possible? It spoke to me profoundly, and I saw the connection in Micah 6:8 to the other reading that I'd mentioned. Several days later, I embarked on a trip to San Francisco and drove one of the sisters to her home in Boulder, Colorado. On the way, we stayed with her friends in North Carolina, and on the first step of a walk the next morning, I saw something shiny on the ground, picked it up and said, Mari, what is this? Oh, that's Micah. It's all over this part of North Carolina. I moved to Los Angeles several years later, and in my 4.5 years in Los Angeles, I was invited to only one bar mitzvah, the Haftorah, Micah 6:8. My mother passed away nearly 2 years ago, and I began coming to morning minyan 3 mornings a week to say Kaddish. She passed away 18 days before her 101st birthday. She was born in 1918, 2 years before women had the right to vote, and had 18 great-grandchildren. As she weakened in her last month, she said to my brother, what do you expect from 100-year-old parts? And a little later, she said, God is good to me, but when it's your time to go, it's your time to go. This is when I started coming to the Jewish Center to say Kaddish for my mother, and have continued after the 11-month mourning period had ended. As my father had done, I say Kaddish for those who have no one to say Kaddish for them, though not twice a day. So that's a story I don't tell at my talks. This is the story that I do tell. This is called The Story of Self. It was developed by Harvard professor Marshall Ganz. Marshall Ganz was a son of a rabbi. I think he was a rabbi, particularly in Bakersfield, California. Marshall Ganz worked with Cesar Chavez for at least a decade in the 70s. And basically, It's what happened in your life and what decisions did you make about that that got you to this point. So this is the story I usually tell. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music, and I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And 41 years ago, I founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music poverty lobby, what's the connection? And when I look back in my life, I see certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. I graduated from high school in 1964 and played timpani in the orchestra at the high school graduation. And just before the ceremony, a flute player came back to the percussion section and told me that a high school fraternity brother of mine in AZA had died the day before in a tractor trailer accident in North Carolina. It was her next door neighbor, so she knew about it before I did. I always say I was 17. When I was 17, mortality was an irrelevant concept. But after the funeral and the Shiva, and after the funeral, I went with my friend's younger brother to pick up his report card from the homeroom teacher. It began to dawn on me that maybe I had 17 more minutes or months or years. And the questions of purpose came up. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 4 years later, college graduation, 1968, Robert Kennedy's assassinated right in the days around college graduation. And it's another one of those, what is this life? What is this death? Why am I here? What am I here to do? No answers, but the question's getting clearer. 9 years later, 1977, I always say I'm a little slow. I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this thing thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. What do I know? I'm a musician. I mean, it's inevitable because there are no solutions. Because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something about it. But I go to this thing and it's obvious right away. There's no mystery to growing food or clean water or basic health or literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I feel hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own. And so I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978 and 1979, I spoke to 7,000 high school students, classroom by classroom, on ending world hunger. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from the US National Academy of Sciences, Food and Nutrition Study, and others calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him, just the name. I would ask, but if you want to guess how many out of 7,000, 200 could answer correctly, just under 3%, and 6,800 couldn't answer correctly, just over 97%. And it was out of that gap that results began. And so what I'm going to do is open my slides. And if you'll give me just a moment, open them more widely and take us to the next section. So in this next section, I'm going to go over some texts and quotes that inspire Tikkun Olam and that inspire me. And my focus won't be on, sorry, somebody's got their, that might be Suki. Suki, you've got you're unmuted. Anyway.
No, because I had a training I had to do and I had to go before then.
So Ellen, if you're able to mute.
Yeah,
Suki.
I am.
Okay, great. So the talk won't focus on interpreting the Hebrew text. I'll leave that to the rabbis. But I do want to share some texts that move me and then focus on expanding our view of what we can do to repair the world. And of course, I'll start with Micah 6:8, the Eternal has told you what is good and what God requires of you, only to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And then from Deuteronomy, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And I love this statement by Rabbi Yvette Lutman. One of my favorite quotes from the Torah is tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. But tirdof really means more than pursue. It means you should run after it, like you're racing to save a life. Like this is your one last chance. That's the intent of the verse. It's not a passive thing. It's a very active thing, and it's not optional. It's what we're required to do. And this last one is, I knew I wanted to include it, but I'm going to expand on it because I wanted to do some research on where did it come from. So Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, prayer is meaningless. And he's talking about personal prayer, not communal prayer. He said, prayer is meaningless unless it is subversive, unless it seeks to overthrow and ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, falsehoods. A liturgical movement must become a revolutionary movement, seeking to overthrow the forces that destroy the promise, the hope, the vision. So I wanted to know where this came from and found out it was at a speech he delivered largely to a Catholic and Protestant audience on August 28th, 1969 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was blown away by what I found, again, new to me. And I'm going to read several excerpts from that same speech. Rabbi Heschel said, religion as an establishment must remain separated from the government. Yet prayer is a voice of mercy, as a cry for justice, as a plea for gentleness, must not be kept apart. Let the spirit of prayer dominate the world. Let the spirit of prayer interfere in the affairs of man. Prayer is private, a service of the heart, but let concern and compassion born out of prayer dominate public life. He went on in his speech, the charity we may do is terribly diminutive compared to what is required. You and I have prayed, have craved to be able to make gentleness a certainty, and have so often failed. But there are in the world so many eyes streaming with tears, hearts dumb with fears, that to be discouraged would be treason. But there are in the world so many eyes streaming with tears, hearts dumb with fears, that to be discouraged would be treason. The predicament of prayer is twofold. Not only do we not know how to pray, we do not know what to pray for. We've lost the ability to be shocked. The malignity of our situation is increasing rapidly. The magnitude of evil is spreading furiously, surpassing our ability to be shocked. The human soul is too limited to experience dismay in proportion to what has happened in Auschwitz and Hiroshima. We do not know what to pray for. Should we not pray for the ability to be shocked at the atrocities committed by man, for the capacity to be dismayed at our inability to be dismayed? Rabbi Heschel has shaken me. We do not know what to pray for. Should we not pray for the ability to be shocked at atrocities committed by man, for the capacity to be dismayed at our inability to be dismayed? Prayer should be an act of catharsis, of purgation of emotions, as well as a process of self-clarification, of examining priorities, of elucidating responsibility. Prayer not verified by conduct is an act of desecration and blasphemy. Do not take a word of prayer in vain. Our deeds must not be a refutation of our prayer. A home, and this is the paragraph before the more famous one. A home is more than an exclusive habitat, mine, never yours. A residence devoid of hospitality is a den or a hole, not a home. Prayer must never be a citadel for selfish concerns, but rather a place for deepening concern over other people's plight. Prayer is a privilege. Unless we learn how to be worthy, we forfeit the right and ability to pray. And then the next paragraph is, prayer is meaningless unless it is subversive. And he's talking about personal prayer, not congregational. Unless it seeks to overthrow and ruin the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, falsehood. A liturgical movement must become a revolutionary movement, seeking to overthrow the forces that destroy the promise, the hope, the vision. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. So this next section is actually, I'm going to include a prayer, and it's not a religious prayer exactly. It's an activist prayer, and this is from Reclaiming Our Democracy. And basically, Steve Valk is telling the story, and his Atlanta Results Group, decades ago, started each of their meetings with this prayer to cause a transformation with their representative, congressman, who was one of a handful of congresspersons who had voted against famine aid for starving Ethiopians. And this is Steve introducing this prayer. Have you ever seen fans of a really bad sports team who sit in the stands with bags over their heads because they're ashamed to be seen rooting for such losers? If politics were a sport and we were sitting in the stands watching our congressman playing on the field, we would be wearing those same bags over our heads over the shame we felt for having Pat Swindoll as our representative. Our thoughts and discussions about him were very negative. We pretty much were writing him off, figuring out our best chance was that maybe he would be defeated in 2 years. But at Sam's suggestion, we began to shift our thinking on Pat. There was this prayer that Newton Hightower had written for his member of Congress in Houston, Texas, someone he had similar difficulties with 2 years before. We adapted it to our congressman, Pat Swindoll. We added Swindoll's name, and it went like this. So this is the prayer they did at the beginning of each meeting for 3 meetings a month. Thank you, God, for Pat Swindoll. We know he's a good man who wants to do right in the world. We know he struggles with the same problems we do, closing our hearts to those who don't agree with us. There are no thoughts or feelings that he's had that we haven't had, vice versa. We pray for all of us to learn compassion for people in our country and far away, for rich and poor. We pray that Pat and we will be less frightened of each other. We pray our focus will be more to love and appreciate him and less to change him. Help us remember that sharing love with the world is the highest contribution we can make and will lead to children being fed and the planet surviving. Forgive our righteousness and anger. Open our hearts and minds to find the next expression of love for Pat that he can receive, end of quote. And he would tell us on a conference call, they would do this prayer, and at the end of the prayer, they'd go, yeah, right. And they do the next time, and they said, fat chance. But they kept doing it, and eventually it sunk in. And they would go to town hall meetings, sessions he called Chat with Pat sessions. They renamed them Spat with Pat because most people came with a bone to pick or whatever. But they'd come with a smile and a handshake and tell him about an intervention that could make a difference for ending poverty around the world. He continues, in the spring of '87, Results launched its microenterprise legislation with the Self-Sufficiency for the Poor Act. We decided it was time for an office visit with our congressman, and 4 of us took off time from work to go see him. It was late afternoon, and we must have been a sight, sitting in his waiting room with a TV and VCR to show him the Grameen Bank video. Earlier in the day, feeling very confident, I told Sarah, my wife, that after Pat agreed to co-sponsor, I would ask him if we could write an op-ed to be under his signature. I don't know, Stephen. I think you'd be pushing it. But I figured once he's committed to the bill, what did I have to lose? The four of us piled into a small office, set up the TV and tape. We all took a deep breath and the congressman joined us. Everyone spoke brilliantly in the meeting. As we were showing the video, Pat was sitting on the desk, knees drawn under his chin, staring intently at the screen. We told him about the tremendous opportunity of the Self-Sufficiency for the Poor Act and asked him if he would be a co-sponsor. I'd be delighted to be a co-sponsor, he said. Sensing we were on a roll, I began to ask about an op-ed, but before the words were even formed in my mouth, the congressman spoke. You know, I think it's important on an issue like this that we try to build public support in the media. I have a column that appears in the local paper, and I'm thinking maybe you could write a piece about this bill and we could run it in my column. Do you think you could do something like that? I glanced over at Sarah with a smile so wide it hurt. Pat, I'd be more than happy to do it. I was now ghostwriting for a man who 2 years earlier had voted against famine aid for Ethiopia. We were probably the only lobbying group in Georgia that could get conservative Pat Swindoll and liberal Congressman John Lewis to co-sponsor the same bill. That experience changed me. I now see that everyone has the potential to do the right thing if given the opportunity. It's refreshing to see people as possibilities rather than as obstacles. And so I just shared that. This talk now will focus on advocacy and on one aspect on the advocacy spectrum: appreciative, relational, bipartisan, deep advocacy. And the usual title for my talk is "Our Shouting and Silence Are Only Two Options: Bringing Bipartisanship and Transformation to Citizen Activism." And I always joke that I'm thinking of retitling it "Our Shouting Silence and Signing Online Petitions Are Only Three Options: Bringing Bipartisanship and Transformation to Citizen Activism." The talk has three main messages. Message one: you can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. And this really relates to the title of this talk, Frustrated with Tikkun Olam Light. We'll show you how much more is possible. So my first main message is you can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. I'm going to demonstrate that in just a moment. You probably haven't. Now, this is a talk I described for newbies. A year ago, January, and a year ago, February, I spoke to 500 citizen climate lobby volunteers. And I said to them, you know, I know you're not newbies, but I want you to see what I say. And my talk for newbies, I say, you probably haven't made a profound difference because of your sense of powerlessness and resignation about politics, especially federal politics. If you find an organization committed to dissolving the powerlessness, and there aren't a lot of them out there, you can make that profound difference. So here's my first example. Well, actually, I'm going to leave it with this one. In the early 80s, Results started lobbying on child survival. And UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, at the time, was reporting that 41,000 children around the world were dying every day from largely preventable malnutrition and disease, things like measles coupled with malnutrition. And Results volunteers lobbied every year, only the first few months, not all year, but the first few months of the year, 85, 86, 1992, 93, every year, 2003, 2004. And over the intervening years, the latest report I have from UNICEF is that the 41,000 child deaths a day has fallen to 14,520 a day. Now that's still scandalously high, but it's also a profound difference on a very big issue. In a New York Times interview 8 years ago, former UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Kul Gautam said in the article, to a great extent, it was because of the receptivity created by Results that the US funding for child survival increased so dramatically, and that led many other countries to come on board. You can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. I had some other examples that I'm skipping in the name of time. Message number one. Wait a minute. If our voices as citizens can make such a profound difference on big issues, why don't more of us get involved? That leads to our sense of powerlessness. This is a quote from Frances Moore Lappé. This year is the 50th anniversary of her book, Diet for a Small Planet. But in a more recent book, she wrote, our real problem is not a heating planet or rampant malnutrition. We only have one real problem, our own feelings of powerlessness to manifest the solutions right in front of our noses. Our real problem is not a heating planet or rampant malnutrition. We only have one real problem, our own feelings of powerlessness to manifest the solutions right in front of our noses. So again, if our voices as citizens can make such a profound difference on big issues, why don't more of us get involved? That leads to our sense of resignation. This is a quote from Harvard professor Lawrence Lessig. He said this 5 years ago. He said, we did a poll and found that 96% of Americans believe it important to reduce the influence of money in politics. That's the good news. But 91% don't think it's possible. That's the politics of resignation. But the politics of resignation gives you a perfect strategy for winning. How do we thaw that resignation? Because once we do, then I think we have a real chance of winning. My second message from You Can Make a Profound Difference is you probably haven't, this is to my newbies, because of, make that profound difference because of a sense of powerlessness and resignation about politics, especially federal politics. Here's a common view of most groups that are doing advocacy work, groups that are not really up for thawing the resignation. I was talking to the head of organizing, it's about 6 years ago, for a really large group like CARE, Save the Children, Oxfam. He said to me, we can't let our volunteers write letters to the editor or op-eds because we can't let our volunteers write letters to the editor or op-eds because they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization. That's the powerlessness, and that's the unwillingness to dissolve it. I coached the group Citizens Climate Lobby its first 7 years, and in 2019, their volunteers had 4,305 letters to the editor, op-eds, and editorials published. One saying they'll get it wrong and misrepresent the organization, and Citizens Climate Lobby saying, well, what do we have to do to help them get it right? And give that to them. And as a result, their volunteers had over 4,300 letters, op-eds, and editorials. Message number 3, if you find an organization committed to dissolving the powerlessness, you can make that profound difference. And I'm going to go over a few of these groups in a moment. I want to take a moment on how does it work. So if volunteers raise their hand at a launch meeting and say, I'm in what? What have the volunteers promised to the organization? And what has the organization promised to the volunteers? And is it powerful? And I'm going to just give you a quick little glimpse. The organizations that I've mentioned and a few more that I'll mention in a moment typically have a monthly conference call with a guest speaker, Q&A. They have a grassroots victory, maybe a little training, an action sheet for the month. So they're feeding the volunteers constantly with a monthly conference call and guest speakers. One of the groups I coach, their guest speaker was Senator Van Hollen of Maryland a few days ago. And so it's very, there's a quite a significant structure of support that really works hard to empower people and dissolve the powerlessness. This is really the last section before we do the how to get involved in any way. One aspect of the civic courage process is a spiritual approach to politics, a politics of love. One citizen climate lobby volunteer called her meetings with 20 congressional offices sacred and profound. And I'm going to read that excerpt right now. This is also from Reclaiming Our Democracy, and I'm going to offer you an opportunity for me to send you 2 chapters from the book if you're interested later in just a moment. What she said was that when she joined CCL, she was suffering from climate trauma. She had read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and she would weep at home and she would weep at work. And then she joined CCL, and 18 months later, she was co-leading a workshop on getting a relationship with your member of Congress and your editorial writer. And at the time she was writing this, she was living in Richmond, Virginia. The member of Congress she was working with was Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader, and the newspaper was the Richmond Times-Dispatch. This is what Ellie says. Our director, Mark Reynolds, likes to say, we're betting the farm on relationships. Then he tells us we need to build relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. Most of us CCL volunteers have never done that before. What in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? And how do we connect with an editorial page editor? Some of us have found models for those relationships in other parts of our lives. Gary in Boston uses the model of a work relationship. My relationship model is different. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date, only you've decided beforehand you're going to marry this fellow. I don't know who you know who talks like this. If it doesn't work out with the editor, you're going to marry one of his friends at the newspaper, the science writer, the environment writer, business editor. Someone at this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in their district, the member's aide has to meet with you. That's what our Congressman's Ledge Director told us in January. Since then, we've met 5 times with the Ledge Director over an 8-month period. We schedule 45-minute meetings with him. He keeps us well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? Because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and slowly heats up over time. That's different than a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. And this is her last paragraph that I'm going to read. During our conference in 2012, I met with 20 congressional offices. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I could no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart toward them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work. And this last bit, in E&E News, Energy and Environment News, Tom Moyer, a citizen climate lobby volunteer who at the time was working with she was current Representative Mia Love, Republican of Utah, said, it's impossible to convince anyone of anything if you fundamentally don't like them. If you walk in thinking they're an idiot and evil, you're done from the start. It doesn't matter how logical your position is. You have to put yourself in a place where you can find something to respect in them. So these are the 3 main messages. I'm going to show you a couple of ways to get involved. You can, and then we're going to go to questions. Message 1, you can make a profound difference on big issues with your voice as a citizen. Number 2, for my newbies, you probably haven't because of a sense of powerless and resignation about politics, especially federal politics. 3, if, big word, if you find an organization committed to dissolving the powerlessness, you can make that profound difference. So I'm going to mention several groups. I've already mentioned Results, which focuses on ending poverty globally and domestic. I mentioned Citizens Climate Lobby, who focuses on climate solutions. I've not mentioned the Quaker Lobby, Friends Committee on National Legislation, working on peace issues and ending endless wars. I also work with American Promise, focused on getting money out of politics. And I've also coached for nearly 2 years Catholic Relief Services, also focused on ending poverty. If you would like to be involved in any of these ways, here's what you should do. You should write me at sam@civiccourage.org. That's sam@civiccourage.org. And then write your name and the word list if you would like to be added to my mailing list. Write the word organizations if you'd want me to send you the links to those 5 organizations. But really, I'm really urging folks who want to get involved in 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, 1, and go deep. Write the word chapters if you'd like me to send you 2 chapters from Reclaiming Our Democracy, and the word slides if you'd like these PowerPoint slides that I've shared. Now, I'm going to put this slide up again in a moment and hopefully put this in chat, but let's close with this. You're basically looking for an organization that can help you move out of your comfort zone, where it's really, really comfortable, and over to where the magic happens. That first letter to the editor is magical. Often that first meeting with a member of Congress is magical, but we need to leave our comfort zones to get there. I'm going to close with this quote. I'm going to read it twice. It's from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. And then I'll go back and show you that list and try to put it in the chat. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature, instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch, which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. And once more, this is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature, instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch, which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. I'm going to put this on one last time. I'm going to try and copy it and put it into chat. But again, if you would like to get any of these things, write me at sam@civiccourage.org. Include your name, the word list, if you'd like to be added to my mailing list. Organizations, the word organizations, if you want me to send you links to those 5 organizations. The word chapters, if you'd like me to send you 2 chapters from Reclaiming Our Democracy. And the word slides, if you'd like a copy of these PowerPoint slides. I'm going to see if I can put this in, hold on, in the chat. And I'll come back to it if I can't. So thank you so much. It's really been a massive honor to be able to talk to you. Let's see if this works in chat. Hold on. There we go. Okay. There we go. And Ellen, we can go to questions.
Yes, so if you have questions or comments for Sam, what I'd like you to do is put your name in the chat and I will call on you and you can unmute. You can either send them directly to me, Ellen Pristak, and I will, or to everyone, doesn't matter, as long as I can see it. And I will call on you and ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
And I'll ask you to just give your name and city. I know we have some folks from around
Yeah.
the country. Go ahead.
So please start typing your name into the chat so I can call on you. Comments or questions?
Yeah, we'll take complaints. I know it's been a lot thrown at you and a lot to think about, but let's see.
And Sam, you can see the chat also in case.
Okay, Sherry,
yeah.
would you unmute yourself and just let us know your name and where you are?
Hi, I'm
Hi there.
Sherry Edelman-Meyer. I'm usually in Princeton, but we are at an Airbnb in Wilmington, North Carolina right now. And I was going to ask a question about tolerance and what your viewpoint on trends in tolerance are. A long time ago, even before the last 2 elections, I think there was a big article in the Washington Post about, I think Georgetown, the head of Georgetown wrote a large article on the state of intolerance in our society and how we had to do better. I was wondering what you think about cultures of tolerance and intolerance based on the type of work you've been doing and where we're going and trends in that regard.
Okay, let me just say a few brief things about it. I think it was evident if you were on for the group that had their member of Congress who voted against famine aid decades ago for Ethiopia, and they were so ashamed of him, and work to get over that level. You may be talking at another level, but I think there's an intolerance that we carry in that way. You remember the woman who said she had started at climate trauma, and she went into these 20 congressional offices and she had to let go of her fear of climate change, her fear that they wouldn't listen to her, releasing fear and centering in love. This is sacred and profound work. That's one aspect of tolerance, because I think one reason people don't get involved in politics is a level of intolerance. Let me say one last thing and see if we might go to someone else. The organization I founded 41 years ago that I've only been directly involved with as a board member for the last 25 years, it's in year 3 of an anti-oppression program. And there's this kind of 3 committees and 2 staff meetings a month are focused on the anti-oppression work. And so, I mean, that's at a more interpersonal, you and your coworkers level where, it's presence itself. I don't know if that's a useful answer, but I think that's something that I would respond with. Is there anyone else?
Okay, Ellen, would you, Ellen Kempler, unmute and ask
Yes,
your question?
Yes, and let us know where you're located.
I'm in Miami, home of Sam Harris, Daley-Harris. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge you for your prophetic, when you're talking about Micah, but you have a prophetic sense in you too, because Reclaiming Our Democracy was written more than 10 years ago, wasn't it?
28.
28. Well,
Years
you
ago.
must have smelled a rat coming down the pike, because in my life, I never dreamed that democracy would be so fragile. And reclaiming it, you were really seeing how it was being taken out of the hands of the individuals and how we can get it back again. It's so timely, that book. But I wanted to just let you know that through Results, which I've been participating in for quite a long time, we went on a trip to Bangladesh to look at the microcredit lending there, because Results looks at health, education, and economic development. So the microcredit, lending money to very, very poor people for business projects, is what attracted me. And I went with my friend Kathleen Close and several other people. There were 20 of us. Joanne Carter was on that trip too. At any rate, it was absolutely divine. I mean, 3 weeks out in the fields watching how these banks worked. I mean, poor. You know, I can't even go into the experience of that, but it was amazing. But we came home on fire wanting to start a microcredit nonprofit in Miami, which we did. 1992. We've been going since then. I don't know how, because I'm not the greatest organizer. We just have a wonderful executive director. But my point is, during COVID, we are so endeared to the city, the county, Miami-Dade, and a lot of federal money came through us. We were giving out loans weekly, $100,000 a week. We wound up giving over $2.5 million to very small businesses if they kept their employees working. And the loans were forgiven if they keep them for over 12 months. So yeah, I feel like Schindler at the end. I thought, you know, this is the least I could have done to be able to keep people. I wasn't sleeping at night thinking people can't pay the rent, people can't put food on the table. But I know that through what we did, we really saved an awful lot of people crashing, losing mortgages, jobs, and all of that kind of stuff, because we kept people working. And if you had told me when I was a kid that I would have been able to have that kind of impact on my city, I'd have said, you're crazy, absolutely crazy. So all I can say, Sam, is thank you so much. Results has done way more for me than I think I've ever done for Results. And it made me a better teacher. Ellen there, I'm a teacher too. It made me a far better teacher, a better wife, a better stepmother. I have 7 stepchildren, so you know, I'm going right to heaven from that. But all the principles we learn are universal principles that let us live our Tikkun Olam. Honestly, my Judaism has really been enriched by my ability to manifest it through Results. Not that I use it.
Ellen, this is brilliant. I just thank you for all that you've done, and I want to just do 2 things. One, see if there's another question, and is there?
Yes, Barbara Abramson, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. That was very inspirational, Sam. My question is, when you coach organizations, what does that consist of? For example, do you train people? I was reading Nonviolent Communications by Marshall Rosenberg. You may know that book. Do you teach people how to listen compassionately, how to word their interactions, or is it more a strategic level? This is how you get your congressperson involved, that sort of thing.
Well, let me just say this. Over a 6-week period ending next Monday, the end of the 6 weeks, I have done a pro bono training for 3 different organizations: Return Peace Corps volunteers for environmental action on working on climate, the International Dark Sky Association working on reducing light pollution so we can see the Milky Way. And on Monday, it will be with Sojourners, and their focus is immigration legislation. And this is a mini pro bono answer to your question, but in each case, I asked them to write their laser talk, their 200-word elevator speech. I helped them edit it. Then I trained them to teach their laser talk. And in the 90-minute letters to the editor training, they teach their laser talk. It's an interactive program learning way of learning a talk for the first 30 minutes. And then I do a 60-minute training on how do you write a letter? What does a paper want? How do you find an angle? All that other stuff. So that's a very small view of what I do with compared to a group that wants the whole enchilada and wants a much more engaged and much deeper level of training.
Okay.
So hopefully that
Dave-
gives you a
Dave
little glimpse.
Saltzman. Dave Saltzman?
Dave,
Yes, hi. Thank you.
Dave, where
for
are
your-
you?
Where are you?
Oh, I'm in Princeton, New Jersey physically.
Great.
Emotionally all over the place, but Princeton,
Okay,
New
good.
Jersey physically. I wanted to give I've not heard of you before. Forgive me for that, my ignorance, but this was my treat tonight to hear about you and what you do. I just wanted to give a testimony to writing letters. I've been writing letters to the editor, primarily to the Star Ledger for about 30 years. It was instinctual. I grew up in the 60s and 70s when the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, environmentalism, voting, civil rights, this happened all the time. And I was expecting the world to keep changing and frankly, to keep improving. Something happened along the way, but that's what I was expecting. And I just thought it was something that was expected of me to voice myself. And I have. And I think once you write your first one, you feel very excited about it and very comfortable. And it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. And but
Okay.
you know, if we find an organization that's encouraging us, coaching us, empowering us to do that, then we have a better shot at keeping going rather than without support, basically. Do you have
Okay,
one
Lori-
last one?
Lori Baumel has a question. Lori?
And Lori, you are where?
Ooh. Right here. Can you hear me
Good.
okay?
Washington,
Yes.
DC.
Washington, DC. Many years ago, you gave me words of wisdom and you've taught me to go the extra mile. And I've been doing that ever since the day I met you. And I think you know that. And you, my son named Sam, happens to be on the line too. And I'm glad that he's finally getting to, we'll unofficially meet you, but I'll get right to my question. One of the reasons I came up here to Washington, DC was to get involved. I read your first book. I read the anniversary edition of your book, and I found Fire Drill Fridays. Is anybody familiar with that? Jane Fonda's organization. And you could go to firedrillfridays.com. She was inspired by Greta Thunberg. And to make a long story short, just go to please, I'm going to ask you the way I would ask a congressman or congressperson. Go to firedrillfridays.com. See what's been done there to fight climate change and to get active with members of Congress. But the advice I need from you, my teacher, is COVID, hopefully, God willing, will be over. And we were going to Capitol Hill and peacefully, we'll say, protesting and walking to the Supreme Court, walking back, walking through the mall area. And I honestly hope it happens again, but I'm a little bit afraid. Things have changed since January 6th. I may not be the only one who feels this way. I want to get involved. You may address me now or maybe at another time,
Yeah.
but I need to overcome the fear of going back. I had my posters and my signs and I was gung-ho and I was doing and meeting the most incredible people that she was bringing to the table and listened. And I was so enriched and so ready.
Yeah.
Now it may start again, hopefully.
Let me add, just add this.
I'll unmute to let you.
Okay, great. Let me just add this because I want to end close to on time and remind people that I've put in the chat the email address, and if you'd like either the slides or 2 chapters from the book or the list of groups or to join my mailing list, you can do that there. My simple message is to urge you, and I'm not saying you don't do this, but I understand the protest part of it. I want to urge you to go inside and sit down and change hearts and minds out of conversation. And let me just say this one last bit, and I'll close with this. I do coaching with groups on working with a member of Congress who's opposed to their whatever the issue is, And I asked them to write these 3 questions down and ask them. Question 1 is, I know that you don't support this legislation. What would it take to change your mind? Question 2, could you say more about that? Question 3, why do you think that is? And that it's a really deep listening exercise, and that we need to do much more of that to have the breakthroughs that are needed to have this kind of change. Ellen Pristack, thank you once more for
Sam, could you
inviting
do me
me.
one favor? Sally Steinberg has been waiting to ask a question. Make her the
Sally?
last one.
Okay,
Okay, and then we can wrap it up.
good.
Sally, go.
Well, I write letters to the editor and to Congress and so on. But my letters to the editor don't get published. So do you have any suggestions about how to make them more effective so that they do get published?
Okay, I'm doing a 90-minute workshop on Monday from 1 to 2:30. If you send me your email, you could listen in and I would answer that question. I do want to say this in closing. Robert Samuelson retired recently from the Washington Post, and he said, by my rough calculation, I have written 2 million words in my Washington Post and Newsweek columns. And I don't think any word I have written has changed anything. It was such a sad commentary. I mean, I don't feel that way in terms of the kinds of work I've been doing for 20 years. And the point is linking my letter to the editor with an organization that's let me just say the letter or the meetings or the whatever, with an organization that is encouraging that happening around the country on something specific, so that my letter, for example, to the editor is less a drop in the bucket, but one more of the kind of avalanche of commentary, meetings, et cetera, that's happening. Don't work alone is basically what I'm saying. Of course, you're free to do that, but I would encourage finding others to work with. Thank you to everyone. I'm so
Thank you.
appreciative.
Yes.
And
Yes, I want to thank Sam for this encouraging, inspirational, I know really such an important statement for all of us. And I'm so glad that you were able to do this and be a participant in our Great Minds Salon. So thank you, Sam. I want to wish everybody, fortunately on Zoom, you don't have to go driving home in the rain. So I just want to wish everybody to stay safe and well and do their part. Thank you again, and good night to everybody.
thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Sam.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Sam.
Good night.
From North Carolina, Blue Ridge Parkway.
Hi, Michael.
Say hi to Micah.
Yeah, Michael, it was Hendersonville, North Carolina, where the camp was.
How did your son Micah get his name?
That would be related.
It's good to see you, Sam.
Love
and
you, man.
everybody else.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
See you.
Mona.
Good night,
Bye,
everybody.
Ariana. Bye, Sally. Bye, Lori.
Love you, Sam. Thank you.
Bye, Sam. Love
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Hey, good night.
Yay.